Chapter 14. At first, Mary stared at the woman in disbelief. "Away from home?" she repeated. "But that is impossible. Surely you are mistaken." Her confidence had been such that she rejected instinctively this sudden and fatal blow to her plans. The woman looked offended. She saw no reason why this stranger should doubt her word. "The vicar left Alternan yesterday afternoon," she said. "He rode away after dinner. I ought to know, for I keep house for him." She must have seen something of the agony of disappointment in Mary's face, for she relented and spoke with kindness. "If there is any message you would like me to give to him when he does return," she began. But Mary shook her head hopelessly, spirit and courage gone from her in a moment with the news. "It'll be too late," she said in despair. "This is a matter of life and death. With Mr. Davy gone, I don't know where I can turn." Once more a gleam of curiosity came into the woman's eyes. "Has someone been taken sick?" she inquired. "I could point you out where our doctor lives if that would help you. Where have you come from tonight?" Mary did not answer. She was thinking desperately of some way out of the situation. To come to Alternan and then return again without help to Jamaica Inn was impossible. She could not place confidence in the village people, nor would they believe her tale. She must find someone in authority, someone who knew something of Joss Merlin and Jamaica Inn. "Who is the nearest magistrate?" she said at length. The woman puckered her brow and considered the question. "There's no one close by us here in Alternan," she said doubtfully. "Why, the nearest would be Squire Besot over to North Hill, and that must be over 4 miles from here. Maybe more, maybe less. I cannot say for certain, for I have never been there. You surely would not walk out there tonight?" "I must," said Mary. "There is nothing else for me to do. I must lose no time either. Forgive me for being so mysterious, but I am in great trouble, and only your vicar or a magistrate can help me. Can you tell me if the road to North Hill is hard to find?" "No, that's easy enough. You go 2 miles along the Launceston Road, and then turn right by the turnpike. But it's scarcely a walk for a maid like you after nightfall, and I'd never go myself. There's rough folk on the moors at times, and you cannot trust them. We dare not venture from our homes these days, with robbery on the high road even, and violence too." "Thank you for your sympathy. I am very grateful to you," said Mary. "But I have lived all my life in lonely places, and I am not afraid." "You must please yourself," answered the woman. "But you'd best stay here and wait for the vicar if you can." "That is impossible," said Mary. "But when he does return, could you tell him perhaps that— Wait, though. If you have pen and paper, I will write him a note of explanation. That would be better still. Come into my cottage here, and you may write what you will. When you have gone, I can take the note to his house at once and leave it on his table, where he will see it as soon as he comes home." Mary followed the woman to the cottage and waited impatiently, while she searched for kitchen for a pen. The time was slipping away fast, and the added journey to North Hill had upset every former calculation. She could hardly return to Jamaica Inn once she had seen Mr. Besot, and still hope her absence had remained unnoticed. Her uncle would take warning from her flight and leave the inn before the intended time, in which case her mission would have been in vain. Now the woman returned with paper and quill, and Mary wrote desperately, never pausing to choose her words. "I came here to ask your help, and you are gone. By now you will have heard with horror, as everyone in the country must have done, of the wreck upon the coast on Christmas Eve. It was my uncle's doing. He and the company from Jamaica Inn. That you will have guessed already. He knows that suspicion will fall on him before long, and because of this he plans to leave the inn tonight and cross the Tamar into Devon. Finding you absent, I go now with all possible haste to to Mr. Bassat at North Hill to tell everything to him and warn him of the escape so that he can send at once to Jamaica Inn to seize my uncle before it's too late. I am giving you this note to your housekeeper, who will, I trust, lay it where your eyes will fall upon it directly you return. In haste, then, Mary Ellen. This she folded and gave to the woman by her side, thanking her and assuring her that she had no fear of the road, and so set out again upon a walk of 4 miles or more to North Hill. She climbed the hill from Alternan with a heavy heart and a wretched sense of isolation. She had placed such faith in Francis Davy that it was hard to realize even yet that by his absence he had failed her. He had not known, of course, that she needed him, and even if he had, perhaps his plans would have come before her troubles. It was disheartening and bitter to leave the lights of Alternan behind her, with nothing as yet accomplished. At this moment, perhaps, her uncle was thundering upon her bedroom door, calling her to answer. He would wait a moment, and then force the door. He would find her gone, and the smashed window would tell him the manner of her going. Whether this would play havoc with his plans was a matter for conjecture. She could not know. Aunt Patience was her concern, and the thought of her setting out upon the journey like a shivering dog tethered to its master made Mary run along the bare white road with fists clenched and chin thrust in the air. She came at last to the turnpike and turned down the narrow, twisting lane as the woman in Alternan had told her. High hedges screened the country on either side, and the dark moor was thrust away and hidden from her eyes. The road twisted and turned, as the lanes in Helford used to do, and this change of scene, coming so suddenly after the bleak high road, put faith in her once more. She cheered herself by painting a picture of the Bassat family as kindly and courteous, like the Vivians at Trelawarren, who would listen to her with sympathy and understanding. She had not seen the squire at his best before. He had come upon Jamaica Inn in high ill humor, and she thought now with regret of the part she had played in his deception. As for his lady, she must know now that a horse thief had made a fool of her in Launceston Market Square, and it was lucky for Mary that she had not stood at Jem's side when the pony was sold back to his rightful owner. She continued with her fantasy of the Bassats, but the little incidents came back to her in spite of it, and at the bottom of her heart she looked upon the approaching interview with trepidation. The contour of the land had changed again, and hills rose away from her, forested and dark, and somewhere beyond her ran a stream singing and breaking over stones. The moorland was no more. The moon came now, topping the further trees, and she walked in confidence with the light blazing a path for her, leading her downwards to the valley where the trees closed in friendliness upon her. She came at last to lodge gates and the entrance to a drive, while beyond her the lane continued to a village. That must be North Hill, and this the manor house belonging to the squire. She went down the avenue to the house, and away in the distance a church clock struck 7. She had been about 3 hours already from Jamaica Inn. Her nervousness returned as she rounded upon the house, large and forbidding in the darkness, with the moon not yet risen high enough to shine kindly upon it. She swung the great bell, and the sound was met at once by the furious baying of hounds. She waited, and presently she heard footsteps from within, and the door was opened by a manservant. He called sharply at the dogs, who thrust their noses at the door and sniffed at Mary's feet. She felt inferior and small, and was conscious of her old dress and shawl before this man who waited for her to speak. "I've come to see Mr. Bassat on very urgent business," she told him. "He would not know my name, but if he could speak to me for a few minutes I would explain. The matter is of desperate importance. Otherwise I would not disturb him at such an hour and on a Sunday night." Mr. Besot left for Launceston this morning, answered the man. He was called away hurriedly, and he has not yet returned. This time Mary could not control herself, and a cry of despair escaped her. I've come some way, she said, in an agony of feeling, as though by her very distress she could bring the squire to her side. If I do not see him within the hour, something terrible will happen, and a great criminal escape the hands of the law. You look at me blankly, but I am speaking the truth. If only there was someone I could turn to. Mrs. Besot is at home, said the man, stung with curiosity. Perhaps she will see you, if your business is as urgent as you say. Follow me, will you, to the library. Never mind the dogs, they will not hurt you. Mary crossed the hall in a dream, knowing only that her plan had failed again, through chance alone, and that she was powerless now to help herself. The wide library, with its blazing fire, seemed unreal to her, and accustomed as she was to the darkness, she blinked at the flood of light that met her eyes. A woman whom she recognized immediately as the fine lady from Launceston Market Square was sitting in a chair before the fire, reading aloud to two children, and she looked up in surprise when Mary was shown into the room. The servant began his explanation in some excitement. This young woman has very grave news for the squire, madam, he said. I thought it best to show her in to you directly. Mrs. Besot rose to her feet at once, dropping the book from her lap. It isn't one of the horses, is it? She said. Richards told me Solomon had been coughing and that Diamond would not take his food. With this undergroom, anything may happen. Mary shook her head. Your household is not in trouble, she said gravely. I bring news of another kind. If I could speak to you alone. Mrs. Besot appeared relieved that her horses were not affected, and she spoke quickly to her children, who ran from the room, followed by the manservant. What can I do for you? She said graciously. You look pale and frightened. Won't you sit down? Mary shook her head impatiently. Thank you, but I must know when Mr. Besot is returning home. I have no idea, replied his lady. He was obliged to leave this morning at a moment's notice, and, to tell you the truth, I'm seriously concerned about him. If this dreadful innkeeper shows fight, as he is certain to do, Mr. Besot may be wounded in spite of the soldiers. What do you mean? Said Mary swiftly. Why, the squire has set out upon a highly dangerous mission. Your face is new to me, and I conclude you are not from North Hill. Otherwise, you would have heard of this man Merlin who keeps an inn upon the Bodmin Road. The squire has suspected him for some while of terrible crimes, but it was not until this morning that the full proof came into his hands. He departed at once for Launceston to summon help, and from what he told me before he went, he intends to surround the inn tonight and seize the inhabitants. He will go well armed, of course, with a large body of men, but I shall not rest until he returns. Something in Mary's face must have warned her, for she turned very pale and backwards towards the fire, reaching out for the heavy bell pull that hung on the wall. You are the girl he spoke about, she said quickly. The girl from the inn, the niece of the landlord. Stay where you are. Don't move, or I'll summon my servants. You are the girl. I know it. He described you to me. What do you want with me? Mary put out her hand, her face as white as the woman's by the fire. I won't hurt you, she said. Please do not ring. Let me explain. Yes, I am the girl from Jamaica Inn. Mrs. Besot did not trust her. She watched Mary with troubled eyes and kept her hand upon the bell rope. I have no money here, she said. I can do nothing for you. If you have come to North Hill to plead for your uncle, it is too late. You misunderstand me, said Mary quietly. and the landlord of Jamaica Inn is a relative to me by marriage only. Why I have been living there does not matter now, and the story would take too long in the telling. I fear and detest him more than you or anyone in the country, and with reason. I came here to warn Mr. Besant that the landlord intended to leave the inn tonight and so escape justice. I have definite proof of his guilt, which I do not believe Mr. Besant to possess. You tell me that he has already gone, and perhaps even now is at Jamaica Inn. Therefore, I have wasted my time in coming here. She sat down then, her hands in her lap, and stared blankly at the fire. She had come to the end of her resources, and for the moment she could not look ahead. All that her weary mind could tell her was that her labor of the evening had been purposeless and in vain. She need never have left her bedroom at Jamaica Inn. Mr. Besant would have come in any case, and now, by her secret meddling, she had blundered into the very mistake she had wished to avoid. She had stayed away too long, and by now her uncle would have guessed the truth, and in all probability made his escape. Squire Besant and his men would ride to a deserted inn. She lifted her eyes once more to the lady of the house. I have done a very senseless thing in coming here, she said hopelessly. I thought it clever, and I have only succeeded in making a fool of myself and of everyone else. My uncle will discover my room is empty and guess at once that I have betrayed him. He will leave Jamaica Inn before Mr. Besant arrives. The squire's lady let go of the bell rope now and came towards her. You speak sincerely, and you have an honest face, she said kindly. I'm sorry if I misjudged you at first, but Jamaica Inn has a terrible name, and I believe anyone would have done the same had they been confronted suddenly with the landlord's niece. You have been placed in a fearful position, and I think you very brave to come here tonight. All those lonely miles to warn my husband. I should have gone mad with fear. The question is this. What would you have me do now? I'm willing to help you in any way you think best. There is nothing we can do, said Mary, shaking her head. I must wait here, I suppose, until Mr. Besant returns. He won't be overpleased to see me when he hears how I have blundered. God knows I deserve every reproach. I will speak for you, replied Mrs. Besant. You could not possibly know my husband had already been informed, and I will soon smooth him down if he needs it. Be thankful you are here in safety meanwhile. How did the squire learn the truth so suddenly? Asked Mary. I've not the slightest idea. He was sent for very suddenly this morning, as I have told you already, and he only gave me the barest details before his horse was saddled and he was gone. Now, Won't you rest yourself and forget for the time the whole hateful business? You are probably famished for want of food. Once more, she approached the fireplace, and this time she pulled the bell rope 3 or 4 times. For all her worry and distress, Mary could not help seeing the irony of the situation. Here was the lady of the house offering hospitality, who a moment ago had threatened her with seizure by the same servants who would now bring her food. She thought also of the scene in the market square when the same lady, in velvet cloak and feathered hat, had paid a high price for her own pony, and she wondered whether the trickery had been discovered. If Mary's own part in the deception should come to light, Mrs. Besot would hardly be so lavish with her hospitality. Meanwhile, the servant appeared, his inquisitive nose in the air, and was told by his mistress to bring a tray of supper for Mary, and the dogs, who had followed him into the room, came now to make friends with the stranger, wagging their tails and pushing their soft noses into her hands, accepting her as a member of the household. Her presence in the manor house at North Hill was still without reality, and though Mary tried, she could not throw aside anxiety and relax. She felt she had no right to be sitting here before a glowing fire, when outside, in the darkness, life and death fought hand to hand before Jamaica Inn. She ate mechanically, forcing herself to swallow the food she needed, aware of the prattle of her hostess at her side, who in the mistaken kindness of her heart believed that incessant conversation about nothing at all was the only method of alleviating worry. The chatter, had she but realized it, increased it, and when Mary had finished her supper and sat once more with her hands on her lap, staring at the fire, Mrs. Besot, searching in her mind for suitable distraction, fetched an album of her own watercolors and proceeded to turn the pages for the benefit of her guest. When the clock on the mantelpiece chimed 8 o'clock in piercing tones, Mary could bear it no longer. This dragging inactivity was worse than danger and pursuit. "Forgive me," she said, rising to her feet. "You have been so kind, and I can never thank you enough, but I am anxious, desperately anxious. I can think of nothing but my poor aunt, who at this moment may be suffering the tortures of hell. I must know what is happening at Jamaica Inn. If I walk back there myself tonight." Mrs. Besot dropped her album in a flutter of distress. "Of course you are anxious. I have seen it all along and tried to take your mind off it. How terrible it is. I am as concerned as you are for my husband's sake, but you cannot possibly walk back there now alone. Why, it would be after midnight before you arrived, and heaven knows what might not happen to you on the way. I will order the trap, and Richard shall go with you. He is most trustworthy and dependable, and can be armed in case of need. If there is fighting in progress, you would see it from the bottom of the hill and would not approach it until it was over. I would come with you myself, but my health is delicate at the moment, and—" "Of course you will do nothing of the kind," said Mary swiftly. "I'm used to danger and the road by night, and you are not. I shall be putting you to very great trouble in harnessing your horse at this hour and rousing your groom. I assure you I'm no longer tired, and I can walk." But Mrs. Besot had already pulled the bell. "Have word sent to Richards to bring the trap around immediately," she said to the astonished servant. "I will give him further orders when he arrives. Tell him there must be as little delay as possible." She then fitted Mary out with a heavy cloak and hood, thick rug and foot warmer, protesting all the while that only her state of health prevented her from making the journey too, for which Mary was utterly thankful, Mrs. Besot being hardly the ideal companion for so improvident and dangerous an escapade. In a quarter of an hour the trap drove up to the door with Richards in charge, Mary recognizing him at once as the servant who had ridden with Mr. Besot originally to Jamaica Inn. His reluctance at leaving his fireside on a Sunday night was soon overcome when he learnt his mission, and with 2 large pistols stuck in his belt and orders to fire at anyone who threatened the trap, He assumed at once an air of truculence and authority hitherto unknown to him. Mary climbed in beside him, the dogs baying a chorus of farewell. And it was only when the drive twisted and the house was out of sight that Mary realized she had set out on what was probably to be a foolhardy and dangerous expedition. Anything might have happened during the 5 hours she had been absent from Jamaica Inn, and even with the trap she could scarcely hope to arrive there before 10:30. She could make no plans, and her action depended upon the moment when it came. With the moon now high in the sky and the soft air blowing upon her, she felt emboldened to face disaster when it came. And this ride to the scene of action, however dangerous, was better than sitting like a helpless child listening to the prattle of Mrs. Besant. This man, Richards, was armed, and she herself would use a gun if necessary. He was burning with curiosity, of course, but she gave short answers to his questions and did not encourage him. The drive was silent then, for the most part, with no other sound but the steady clopping of the horses' hoofs upon the road, and now and again an owl hooted from the still trees. The rustle of hedgerow and the creeping country whispers were left behind when the trap came out upon the Bodmin road, and once again the dark moor stretched out on either side, lapping the road like a desert. The ribbon of highway shone white under the moon. It wound and was lost in the fold of the further hill, bare and untrodden. There were no travelers but themselves upon the road tonight. On Christmas Eve, when Mary had ridden here, the wind had lashed venomously at the carriage wheels, and the rain hammered the windows. Now the air was still cold and strangely still, and the moor itself lay placid and silver in the moonlight. The dark tors held their sleeping faces to the sky. The granite features softened and smoothed by the light that bathed them. Theirs was a peaceful mood, and the old gods slept undisturbed. Briskly, the horse and trap covered the weary miles that Mary had walked alone. She recognized each bend in the road now, and how at times the moor encroached upon it, with high tufts of grass or twisted stem of broom. There, beyond her in the valley, would be the lights of Alternan, and already the 5 lanes branched out from the roads like fingers from a hand. The wild stretch of Jamaica Inn lay before them. Even when the night was still, the wind played here, barren open as it was to every compass point, and tonight it hummed from Rough Tor in the west, keen as a knife and cold, gathering the marsh smells as it came over the bitter turf and the running streams. There was still no sign of man or beast upon the road, which rose and dipped again across the moor. And though Mary strained her eyes and her ears, she could hear nothing. On such a night, the slightest sound would be magnified, and the approach of Mr. Besot's party, numbering as they would 12 men or so, said Richards, would easily be heard 2 miles or more away. We shall find them there before us, as likely as not, he told Mary, and the landlord, with his hands bound, breathing fire at the squire. It will be a good thing for the neighborhood when he's put out of harm's way, and he would have been before now, if the squire could have had his way. It's a pity we were not here sooner. There'll have been some sport in taking him, I reckon. Little sport if Mr. Besot finds that his bird has flown, said Mary quietly. Joss Merlin knows these moors like the back of his hand, and he'll not linger once he has the start of an hour or less than that. My master was bred here, same as the landlord, said Richards. If it comes to a chase across country, I'd lay odds on the squire every time. He's hunted here, man and boy, for nearly 50 years, I should say, and where a fox will go, the squire will follow. But they'll catch this one before he starts to run, if I'm not mistaken. Mary let him continue. His occasional jerky statements did not worry her, as the kindly prattle of his mistress had done, and his broad back and honest, rugged face gave her some confidence in this night of strain. They were approaching the dip in the road and the narrow bridge that spanned the river Fowey. Mary could hear the ripple and play of the stream as it ran swiftly over the stones. The steep hill to Jamaica rose in front of them, white beneath the moon, and as the dark chimneys appeared above the crest, Richard fell silent, fumbling with the pistols in his belt, and he cleared his throat with a nervous jerk of his head. Mary's heart beat fast now, and she held tight to the side of the trap. The horse bent to the climb, his head low, and it seemed to Mary that the clop of his hoofs rang too loudly on the surface of the road, and she wished they had been more silent. As they drew near to the summit of the hill, Richard turned and whispered in her ear, "Would it be best for you to wait here, in the trap by the side of the road, and I go forward and see if they are there?" Mary shook her head. "Better for me to go," she said, "and you follow a pace or two behind, or stay here and wait until I call." From the silence, it seems as though the squire and his party are not yet come after all, and that the landlord has escaped. Should he be there, however, my uncle, I mean, I can risk an encounter with him when you could not. Give me a pistol. I shall have little to fear from him then." "I hardly think it right for you to go alone," said the man doubtfully. "You may walk right into him, and I hear no sound from you again. It's strange, as you say, this silence. I had expected shouting and fighting and my master's voice topping it all. It's almost unnatural in a way. They must have been detained at Launceston. I half fancy there'd be some wisdom if we turned aside down that track there and waited for them to come." "I've waited long enough tonight and gone half mad with it," said Mary. "I'd rather come upon my uncle face to face than lie here in the ditch, seeing and hearing nothing. It's my aunt I'm thinking of. She's as innocent as a child in all this business, and I want to care for her if I can. Give me a pistol and let me go. I can tread like a cat, and I'll not run my head into a noose, I promise you." She threw off the heavy cloak and hood that had protected her from the cold night air, and seized hold of the pistol that he had handed down to her reluctantly. "Don't follow me unless I call or give some signal," she said. "Should you hear a shot fired, then perhaps it would be as well to come after me. But come warily for all that. There's no need for both of us to run like fools into danger. For my part, I believe my uncle to have gone." She hoped now that he had, and by driving into Devon made an end to the whole business. The country would be rid of him, and in the cheapest possible way. He might, even as he had said, start life again, or, more likely still, dug himself in somewhere 500 miles from Cornwall, and drink himself to death. She had no interest now in his capture. She wanted it finished and thrust aside. She wanted, above all, to lead her own life and forget him, and to put the world between her and Jamaica Inn. Revenge was an empty thing. To see him bound and helpless, surrounded by the squire and his men, would be of little satisfaction. She had spoken to Richards with confidence, but for all that she dreaded an encounter with her uncle, armed as she was. And the thought of coming upon him suddenly in the passage of the inn with his hands ready to strike and his bloodshot eyes staring down upon her made her pause in her stride before the yard and glance back to the dark shadow in the ditch that was Richard's in the trap. Then she leveled her pistol, her finger upon the trigger, and looked round the corner of the stone wall to the yard. It was empty. The stable door was shut. The inn was as dark and silent as when she had left it nearly 7 hours before, and the windows and the door were barred. She looked up to her window, and the pane of glass gaped empty and wide, unchanged since she had climbed her mitt that afternoon. There were no wheel marks in the yard, no preparations for departure. She crept across to the stable and laid her ear against the door. She waited a moment, and then she heard the pony move restlessly in his stall. She heard his hoofs clink on the cobbles. Then they had not gone, and her uncle was still at Jamaica Inn. Her heart sank, and she wondered if she should return to Richard's in the trap and wait, as he had suggested, until Squire Besot and his men arrived. She glanced once more at the shuttered house. Surely if her uncle intended to leave, he would have gone before now. The cart alone would take an hour to load, and it must be nearly 11 o'clock. He might have altered his plans and decided to go on foot, but then Aunt Patience could never accompany him. Mary hesitated. The situation had become odd now and unreal. She stood by the porch and listened. She even tried the handle of the door. It was locked, of course. She ventured a little way round the corner of the house, past the entrance to the bar, and so to the patch of garden behind the kitchen. She trod softly now, keeping herself in shadow, and she came to where a chink of candlelight would show through the gap in the kitchen shutter. There was no light. She stepped close now to the shutter and laid her eye against the slit. The kitchen was black as a pit. She laid her hand on the knob of the door and slowly turned it. It gave, to her astonishment, and the door opened. This easy entrance, entirely unforeseen, shocked her for a moment, and she was afraid to enter. Supposing her uncle sat on his chair waiting for her, his gun across his knee. She had her own pistol, but it gave her no confidence. Very slowly she laid her face to the gap made by the door. No sound came to her. Out of the tail of her eyes she could see the ashes of the fire, but the glow was almost gone. She knew then that nobody was there. Some instinct told her that the kitchen had been empty for hours. She pushed the door wide and went inside. The room struck cold and damp. She waited until her eyes had become accustomed to the darkness, and she could make out the shape of the kitchen table and the chair beside it. There was a candle on the table, and she thrust it into the feeble glow of the fire where it took light and flickered. When it burnt strong enough, she held it high above her head and looked about her. The kitchen was still strewn with the preparations for departure. There was a bundle belonging to Aunt Patience on the chair, and a heap of blankets lay on the floor ready to be rolled. In the corner of the room, where it always stood, was her uncle's gun. They had decided then to wait for another day, and were now abed and asleep in the room upstairs. The door to the passage was wide open, and the silence became more oppressive than before, strangely and horribly still. Something was not as it had been. Some sound was lacking that must account for the silence. Then Mary realized that she could not hear the clock. The ticking had stopped. She stepped into the passage and listened again. She was right. The house was silent because the clock had stopped. She went forward slowly, with the candle in one hand and the pistol leveled in the other. She turned the corner where the long, dark passage branched into the hall, and she saw that the clock, which stood always against the wall beside the door into the parlor, had toppled forward and fallen upon its face. The glass was splintered in fragments on the stone flags, and the wood was split. The wall gaped bare where it had stood, very naked now and strange, with the paper marked a deep yellow in contrast to the faded pattern of the wall. The clock had fallen across the narrow hall, and it was not until she came to the foot of the stairs that Mary saw what was beyond. The landlord of Jamaica Inn lay on his face amongst the wreckage. The falling clock had hidden him at first, for he sprawled in the shadow, one arm flung high above his head and the other fastened upon the broken, splintered door. Because his legs were stretched out on either side of him, one foot jamming the wainscoting, he looked even larger in death than he did before, his great frame blocking the entrance from wall to wall. There was blood on the stone floor, and blood between his shoulders, dark now and nearly dry, where the knife had found him. When he was stabbed from behind, he must have stretched out his hands and stumbled, dragging at the clock. And when he fell upon his face, the clock crashed with him to the ground, and he died there, clutching at the door. Chapter 15. It was a long while before Mary moved away from the stairs. Something of her own strength had ebbed away, leaving her powerless like the figure on the floor. Her eyes dwelt upon little immaterial things, the fragments of the glass from the smashed clock face that were blood-stained too, and the discolored patch of the wall where the clock had stood. A spider settled on her uncle's hand, and it seemed strange to her that the hand stayed motionless and did not seek to rid itself of the spider. Her uncle would have shaken it free. Then it crawled from his hand and ran up his arm, working its way beyond the shoulder. When it came to the wound, it hesitated, curiosity, and there was a lack of fear in its rapidity that was somehow horrible and desecrating to death. The spider knew that the landlord could not harm him. Mary knew this too, but she had not lost her fear like the spider. It was the silence that frightened her most. Now that the clock no longer ticked, her nerves strained for the sound of it. The slow wheezing choke had been familiar and a symbol of normality. The light of her candle played upon the walls, but it did not reach to the top of the stairs, where the darkness gaped at her like a gulf. She knew she could never climb those stairs again, now tread that empty landing. Whatever lay beyond her and above must rest there undisturbed. Death had come upon the house tonight, and its brooding spirit still hovered in the air. She felt now that this was what Jamaica Inn had always waited for and feared. The damp walls, the creaking boards, the whispers in the air, and the footsteps that had no name. These were the warnings of a house that had felt itself long threatened. Mary shivered, and she knew that the quality of this silence had origin in far-off, buried, and forgotten things. She dreaded panic above all things. The scream that forced itself to the lips, the wild stumble of groping feet and hands that beat the air for passage. She was afraid that it might come to her, destroying reason. And now that the first shock of discovery had lessened, she knew that it might force its way upon her, close in and stifle her. Her fingers might lose their sense of grip and touch, and the candle fall from her hands. Then she would be alone and covered by the darkness. The tearing desire to run seized hold of her, and she conquered it. She backed away from the hall towards the passage, the candle flickering in the draught of air. And when she came to the kitchen and saw the door still open to the patch of garden, her calm deserted her, and she ran blindly through the door to the cold, free air outside, a sob in her throat, her outstretched hands grazing the stone wall as she turned the corner of the house. She ran like a thing pursued across the yard and came to the open road, where the familiar stalwart figure of the squire's groom confronted her. He put out his hands to save her, and she groped at his belt, feeling for security, her teeth chattering now on the full shock of reaction. "He's dead," she said. "He's dead there on the floor. I saw him." And try as she did, she could not stop this chattering of her teeth and the shivering of her body. He led her to the side of the road, back to the trap, and he reached for the cloak and put it around her. And she held it to her close, grateful for the warmth. "He's dead," she repeated, "stabbed in the back. I saw the place where his coat was rent and there was blood. He lay on his face. The cloak had fallen with him. The blood was dry, and he looked as though he had lain there for some time. The inn was dark and silent. No one else was there." "Was your aunt gone?" whispered the man. Mary shook her head. "I don't know. I did not see. I had to come away." He saw by her face that her strength had gone, and she would fall. And he helped her up into the trap and climbed onto the seat beside her. "All right, then," he said. "All right. Sit quiet. Then. Here. No one shall hurt you. There now. All right, then." His gruff voice helped her, and she crouched beside him in the trap, the warm cloak muffled to her chin. "That was no sight for a maid to see," he told her. "You should have let me go. I wish now you had stayed back here in the trap. That's terrible for you to see him lying dead there, murdered." Talking eased her, and his rough sympathy was good. "The pony was still in the stable," she said. "I listened at the door and heard him move. They had never even finished their preparations for going. The kitchen door was unlocked, and there were bundles on the floor there. Blankets, too, ready to load into the cart. It must have happened several hours ago." "It puzzles me what the squire is doing," said Richards. "He should have been here before this. I'd feel easier if he'd come and you could tell your story to him. There's been bad work here tonight. You should have never come." They fell silent, and both of them watched the road for the coming of the squire. "Who'd have killed the landlord?" said Richards, puzzled. "He's a match for most men and should have held his own. There was plenty who might have had a hand in it, though, for all that. If ever a man was hated, he was." "There was the peddler," said Mary slowly. "I'd forgotten the peddler. It must have been him, breaking out from the barred room." She fastened upon the idea to escape from another, and she retold the story eagerly now of how the peddler had come to the inn the night before. It seemed at once that the crime was proven and there could be no other explanation. "He'll not run far before the squire catches him," said the groom. "You can be sure of that. No one can hide on these moors unless he's a local man. I have never heard of Harry the peddler before. But then they came from every hole and corner in Cornwall, Joss Merlin's men, by all accounts. They were, as you might say, the dregs of the country." He paused, and then, "I'll go to the inn if you would care for me to, and see for myself if he has left any trace behind him. There might be something." Mary seized hold of his arm. "I'll not be alone again," she said swiftly. "Think me a coward if you will, but I could not stand it. Had you been inside Jamaica Inn, you would understand. There's a brooding quiet about the place tonight that cares nothing for the poor dead body lying there." "I can mind the time before your uncle came there, when the house stood empty," said the servant. "And we'd take the dogs there after rats for sport. We thought nothing of it then. Just a lonely shell of a place it seemed, without a soul of its own. But the squire kept it in good repair, mind you, while he waited for a tenant. I'm a Saint man myself, and never came here until I served the squire. But I've been told in the old days there was good cheer and good company at Jamaica, with friendly, happy folk living in the house, and always a bed for a passing traveler upon the road. The coaches stayed here then, what never do now, and hounds would meet here once a week in Mr. Besot's boyhood. Maybe these things will come again." Mary shook her head. I've only seen the evil, she said. I've only seen the suffering there's been, and the cruelty, and the pain. When my uncle came to Jamaica Inn, he must have cast his shadow over the good things, and they died. Their voices had sunk to a whisper, and they glanced half-consciously over their shoulders to the tall chimneys that stood out against the sky, clear-cut and gray, beneath the moon. They were both thinking of one thing, and neither had the courage to mention it first. The groom from delicacy and tact, Mary from fear alone. Then at last she spoke, her voice husky and low. Something has happened to my aunt as well. I know that. I know she is dead. That's why I was afraid to go upstairs. She is lying there in the darkness on the landing above. Whoever killed my uncle will have killed her too. The groom cleared his throat. She may have run out onto the moor, he said. She may have run for help along the road. No, whispered Mary. She would never have done that. She would be with him now, down in the hall there, crouching by his side. She is dead. I know she is dead. If I had not left her, this would never have happened. The man was silent. He could not help her. After all, she was a stranger to him, and what had passed beneath the roof of the inn while she had lived there was no concern of his. The responsibility of the evening lay heavy enough upon his shoulders, and he wished that his master would come. Fighting and shouting, he understood. There was some sense in that. But if there had really been a murder, as she said, and the landlord lying dead there, and his wife too, why, they could do no good in staying here like fugitives themselves, crouching in the ditch, but were better off and away, and so down the road to sight and sound of human habitation. I came here by the orders of my mistress, he began awkwardly. But she said the squire would be here. Seeing as he is not, Mary held up a warning hand. Listen, she said sharply. Can you hear something? They strained their ears to the north. The faint clop of horses was unmistakable, coming from beyond the valley over the brow of the further hill. It's them, said Richard excitedly. It's the squire. He's coming at last. Watch now. We'll see them go down the road into the valley. They waited. And when a minute had passed, the first horseman appeared like a black smudge against the hard white road, followed by another, and another. They strung out in a line and closed again, traveling at a gallop, while the cob who waited patiently beside the ditch pricked his ears and turned an inquiring head. The clatter drew near, and Richards, in his relief, ran out upon the road to greet them, shouting and waving his arms. The leader swerved and drew rein, calling out in surprise at the sight of the groom. "What the devil do you do here?" he shouted, for it was the squire himself, and he held up his hand to warn his followers behind. "The landlord is dead, murdered," cried the groom. "I have his niece here with me in the trap." "It was Mrs. Besot herself who sent me out here, sir. This young woman had best to tell you the story in her own words." He held the horse while his master dismounted, answering as well as he could the rapid questions put to him by the squire, and the little band of men gathered around him too, pressing for news. Some of them dismounting also, and stamping their feet on the ground, blowing upon their hands for warmth. "If the fellow has been murdered, as you say, then by God it serves him right," said Mr. Besot. "But I'd rather have clapped irons on him myself for all that. You can't pay scores against a dead man. Go on into the yard, the rest of you, while I can see if I get some sense out of the girl yonder. Richards, relieved of responsibility, was surrounded at once and treated as something of a hero who had not only discovered the murder, but had tackled the author of it single-handed. Until he reluctantly admitted that his part in the adventure had been small. The squire, whose mind worked slowly, did not realize what Mary was doing in the trap, and considered her as his groom's prisoner. He heard with astonishment how she had walked the long miles to North Hill in hopes of finding him, and, not content with that, must return again to Jamaica Inn. "This is altogether beyond me," he said gruffly. "I believed you to be in conspiracy with your uncle against the law. Why did you lie to me then when I came here earlier in the month? You told me you knew nothing." "I lied because of my aunt," said Mary wearily. "Whatever I said to you then was for her sake only, nor did I know as much as I do now. I am willing to explain everything in a court of law should it be necessary. But if I tried to tell you now, you would not understand. Nor have I the time to listen," replied the squire. "You did a brave thing in walking all that way to North Hill to warn me, and I shall remember it in your favor. But all this trouble could have been avoided, and the terrible crime of Christmas Eve prevented, had you been frank with me before. However, all that for later. My groom tells me that you have found your uncle murdered, but beyond that you know nothing of the crime. Had you been a man, you should go with me now to the inn, but I will spare you that. I can see you have endured enough." He raised his voice and shouted for the servant. "Take the trap up to the yard and stay beside it with the young woman while we break into the inn." And turning to Mary, "I must ask you to wait in the yard, if your courage permits you. You are the only one amongst us who knows anything of the matter, and you are the last to see your uncle alive." Mary nodded her head. She was nothing more now than a passive instrument of the law, and must do as she was bidden. He had at least spared her the ordeal of going once more into the empty inn and looking upon the body of her uncle. The yard, that had lain in shadow when she came, was now the scene of activity. Horses stamped on the cobblestones, and there was the shaking, ringing sound of bit and bridle, and there were footsteps, and the voices of the men, topped with the squire's gruff word of command. He led the way round to the back, at Mary's direction, and presently the bleak and silent house lost its shuttered air. The window in the bar was flung open, and the windows of the parlor. Some of the men went upstairs and explored the empty guest rooms above, for these windows were unbarred also and open to the air. Only the heavy entrance door remained shut, and Mary knew that the landlord's body lay stretched across the threshold. Someone called sharply from the house and was answered by a murmur of voices and a question from the squire. The sounds came plainly now through the open parlor window to the yard outside. Richards glanced across at Mary, and he saw by the pallor of her face that she had heard. A man who stood by the horses, and who had not gone with the others inside the inn, shouted to the groom. "Do you hear what they say?" he said in some excitement. "There's another body there on the landing upstairs." Richard said nothing. Mary drew her cloak further around her shoulders and pulled the hood across her face. They waited in silence. Presently, the squire himself came out into the yard and crossed to the trap. "I'm sorry," he said. "I have bad news for you. Perhaps you expected it." "Yes," said Mary. "I don't think she suffered at all. She must have died at once. She was lying just inside the bedroom at the end of the passage, stabbed like your uncle. She could have known nothing. Believe me, I am very sorry. I wish I could have spared you this." He stood by her, awkward and distressed, and repeated again that she could not have suffered, that she had not known, but was killed instantly. And then, seeing that Mary were better left alone and he could not help her, he stamped back across the yard to the inn. Mary sat motionless, shrouded in her cloak, and she prayed in her own way that Aunt Patience would forgive her and find peace now, wherever she should be, and that the dragging chains of life would fall away from her, leaving her free. She prayed also that Aunt Patience would understand what she had tried to do, and above all, that her mother would be there, and she would not be alone. These were the only thoughts that brought her a measure of consolation, and she knew if she went over in her mind again the story of the last few hours, she would come to the one and only accusation. Had she not left Jamaica Inn, Aunt Patience might not have died. Once again, though, there came a murmur of excitement from the house, and this time there was shouting, and the sound of running feet, and several voices raised in unison, so that Richards ran to the open parlor window, forgetting his trust in the excitement of the moment, and thrust his leg over the sill. There was a crash of splintering wood, and the shutters were torn away from the window of the barred room, which no one, apparently, had entered up to now. The men were tearing away the barricade of wood, and someone held a flare to the light of the room. Mary could see the flame dance in the draught of air. Then the light vanished, and the voices died away, and she could hear the sound of footsteps tramping to the back of the house. And then, round the corner to the yard they came, 6 or 7 of them, led by the squire, holding amongst them something that squirmed and wriggled and fought for release, with hoarse, bewildered cries. "They've got him! It's the murderer!" shouted Richards, calling to Mary. And she turned, brushing aside the hood that covered her face, and looked down upon the group of men who came to the trap. The captive stared up at her. Blinking at the light, they flashed in his eyes. His clothes cobweb-covered, his face unshaven and black. And it was Harry, the peddler. "Who is he?" they shouted. "Do you know him?" And the squire came round in front of the trap and bade them bring the man close so that she could see him. "What do you know of this fellow?" he said to Mary. "We found him in the barred room yonder lying on some sacks, and he denies all knowledge of the crime." "He was of the company," said Mary slowly, "and he came to the inn last night and quarreled with my uncle. My uncle had the better of him and locked him up in the barred room, threatening him with death. He had every reason to kill my uncle, and no one could have done it but he. He is lying to you." "But the door was locked upon him. It took 3 of us or more to break it down from the outside," said the squire. "This fellow had never been from the room at all. Look at his clothes. Look at his eyes, dazzled still by the light. He's not your murderer." The peddler glanced furtively from one to the other of his guards, his small, mean eyes darting to right and left. And Mary knew at once that what the squire had said was no more than the truth. Harry the peddler could not have committed the crime. He had lain in the barred room since the landlord put him there over 24 hours ago. He had lain there in the dark, waiting for release, and during the long hours someone had come to Jamaica Inn and gone again, his work completed in the silence of the night. "Whoever did it knew nothing of this rascal, locked in the room yonder," continued the squire, "and he's no use to us as a witness, as far as I can see, for he heard and saw nothing. But we'll have him in jail for all that, and hang him too if he deserves it, which I'll be bound he does. But he shall turn king's evidence first and give us the names of his companions. One of them has killed the landlord for revenge. You may depend on that, and we'll track him down if we set every hound in Cornwall on his heels. Take this fellow to the stable, some of you, and hold him there. The rest come back to the inn with me." They dragged the peddler away, who, realizing that some crime had been discovered and suspicion might possibly rest upon him, found his tongue at last and began to blab his innocence, whining for mercy and swearing by the Trinity, until someone cuffed him to silence and threatened him with a rope there and then above the stable door. This silenced him, and he fell to muttering blasphemies beneath his breath, turning his rat's eyes now and again to Mary, who who sat above him in the trap a few yards away. She waited there, her chin in her hands and the hood fallen away from her face, and she neither heard his blasphemies nor saw his furtive narrow eyes, for she remembered other eyes that had looked upon her in the morning, and another voice that had spoken calm and cold, saying of his brother, "He shall die for this." There was the sentence, flung carelessly on the way to Launceston Fair, "I have never killed a man yet." And there was the gypsy woman in the market square, "There's blood on your hands. You'll kill a man one day." All the little things she would forget rose up again and clamored against him. His hatred of his brother, his streak of callous cruelty, his lack of tenderness, his tainted Merlin blood. That, before all things, would betray him first, like to like, one of a kind. He had gone to Jamaica Inn as he had promised, and his brother had died as he had sworn. The whole truth stared up at her in ugliness and horror, and she wished now that she had stayed, and he had killed her too. He was a thief, and like a thief in the night he had come and was gone again. She knew that the evidence could be built against him piece by piece, with herself as witness. It would be a fence around him from which there would be no escape. She had only to go now to the squire and say, "I know who it is that has done this thing." And they would listen to her, all of them. They would crowd around her like a pack of hounds panting for the chase, and the trail would lead them to him past Rushyford and through Trewortha Marsh to 12 men's moor. He slept there now, perhaps, forgetful of his crime and caring not at all, stretched on his bed in the lonely cottage where he and his brother had been born. When morning came, he would be gone, whistling perhaps, throwing his legs across a horse, and so away and out of Cornwall forever, a murderer like his father before him. In her fancy she heard the clop of his horse upon the road, far distant in the quiet night, beating a tempo of farewell. But fancy became reason, and reason became certainty, and the sound she heard was not the dream thing of her imagination, but the live tapping of a horse upon the highway. She turned her head and listened, nerve strung now to the limit, and the hands that held the cloak around her were clammy and cold with sweat. The sound of the horse drew nearer still. He was trotting at a steady, even pace, neither hurried nor slow, and the rhythmic jogging tune that played on the road had echo in her throbbing heart. She was not alone now as she listened. The men who guarded the peddler murmured to one another in low tones and looked towards the road, and the groom Richards, who was with them, hesitated a moment and then went swiftly to the inn to call the squire. The beat of the horse's hooves rang loud now as he climbed the hill, sounding like a challenge to the night, so silent and still. And as he topped the summit and rounded the wall into view, the squire came out of the inn, followed by his men. "Stop," he called. "In the name of the king, I must ask your business on the road tonight." The horseman drew rein and turned into the yard. The black riding cape gave no clue to his identity, but when he bowed and bared his head, the thick halo of hair shone white under the moon, and the voice that spoke in answer to the squire was gentle and sweet. "Mr. Besot of North Hills, I believe," he said, and he leant forward in his saddle with a note in his hand. "I have a message here from Mary Yellen of Jamaica Inn, who asks my help in trouble. But I see by the company assembled here that I have come too late. You remember me, of course. We have met before. I am the vicar of Alternan."